Hello and welcome back for another episode in our Courtroom Confidential Conversations series, where we bring you creators and podcasters, YouTubers, and others in the true crime space and just have a conversation. Many of these folks are people that you already have been fans of. Maybe you've heard them talk about cases or trials that you follow, but I want to know a little bit more about them. What brought them into this true crime world? What are their passions? What makes them tick? So today I am very excited to tell you who we are joined by, and I ask you to please help me in welcoming an Emmy award-winning broadcast journalist with more than 2 decades of experience crafting stories and long-form documentaries, the host of the wildly popular podcast and YouTube channel Surviving the Survivor, your favorite, and my very good friend Joel Waldman. How are you, my friend?
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this show and for this series because
Yeah.
now I get to find out about other people who
Yeah.
I really didn't know the backstory. It's a great idea.
Yeah, you'll have to send me out some suggestions if they can take time out of this crazy, busy, streaming, following cases live world and give me a few minutes, which I'm very grateful you were able to. I think that a lot of these people have very fascinating stories that, coming from backgrounds that were completely unexpected to be ending up in the world that they are now, you included. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, 100%. And, I don't think people realize exactly how all consuming this is. I know you're kind of starting your thing and
Yeah.
getting deeper into it, but It's, uh it's I love it, but it never ends, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like you're constantly working on the next thing, so, it's exciting, it's fun, and this is definitely, in my opinion, the way the media
I
landscapes is
completely
shifting.
agree with you. I
Yeah.
completely agree with you. When you see, um, different media organizations trying to go back into television or more traditional stuff, you're like, "What are you doing here? You're going backwards, you're going against the tide." It definitely seems like, at least most of the people I know, when they're turning towards news or they wanna follow, a particular topic, they're going to YouTube, they're going to Twitter, they're going to places that are not what you would consider traditional media. So it definitely does seem like it's the future. And I agree with you. It's a lot of work. When my wife and I first talked about how deep do we want to jump into this, I said, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to have to do it. And boy, did we bit off plenty enough to chew. So I'm a busy man. But let's
Not
jump
to not to
into.
mention not to mention you have a baby, but, yeah, I real quick, I agree with you completely. The days of the soundbite is, over.
Yeah.
People go on other, kinda traditional media, and you have 8 to 12 seconds for a soundbite, and no one wants that anymore. Just my in the last day, my home state, New Jersey, the paper I grew up with as a kid was the Star Ledger. Huge, it's the biggest paper in Jersey. They just announced no more print editions; they're just going digital. But one thing I'll never forget is, and I haven't listened to his podcast. I joke that he's the competition, but I did once hear Joe Rogan say that everything is so instant and everything is
Yeah.
so short. You look at Twitter, 100 and whatever characters it is today, 140 characters, TikTok, 10-second videos. But he said it cuts both ways and people are dying for long form content. And look,
Yes.
his shows are 3 hours. So I never really thought about it till he said that. But it is 100% accurate that 100% accurate that people do want much more in-depth style interviews. So,
No,
that's my 2 cents on that.
it's absolutely right. I've heard him talk about that. We say that, oh, the reason things are changing is people's attention spans are shorter. And he's like, no, they're not. I'm doing 3.5 hour long conversations. They obviously have the attention span. It's what they're being fed is just not all that attention grabbing. So it's absolutely true that I think people are looking for something different. And I think one of those places they're looking is YouTube, a space that you have uh, begun to occupy. But before all of that, this was not something you were doing. You did not wake up and say, "I'm going to become a YouTuber after college." get us back to your first career and where you started out and how this all ended up here.
Yeah, by the way, there was no YouTube when I graduated college, but that's a whole other story. Um, so it's a convoluted story. And I contrast it with a lot of people don't know I have a sister, but I have a sister. Her name is Arden, like as in Elizabeth Arden. Uh, Wonderful, awesome, great human. Also the perfect child. I was a kid with Carm. She was valedictorian of her high school class. She finished medical school. She was in a 6-year program, so she went to medical school like on a expedited track. Meanwhile, me, I really had I just didn't know which way I wanted to go. And I never even considered journalism as a career. I grew up in a town right next to Rutgers University, so everybody who I knew in my town, the parents were either professors at Rutgers, academics, or they were lawyers and doctors. There was no entrepreneurs. There was no YouTube. Digital stuff wasn't happening, and I knew number one, I could barely pass physics, so I knew I wasn't going to be a doctor, and I just didn't have any interest in being a lawyer, and I was kind of lost for a really long time. So one thing people don't know about me is I actually um, went to graduate school for education, basically because I had no clue what I wanted to do, and I spent a year and a half in one of the worst sections of Manhattan. And the reason you know this is the undercover cop cars up there are unmarked yellow cabbies. So I ended up working for a Head Start program, and I was responsible for like 30 kids who are like 4 and 5 years old, teaching them, and I loved it. But it was something I would never do as a career ever. It
I
was
don't know
so
why
hard.
I'm completely shocked by this. I don't not that I not that I don't think you could do it, but I did not think that that was in your resume.
Yeah, it was, a very poor neighborhood. Majority of the kids did not have fathers at home. I was like the only guy. All the other teachers were women. It was within like a PS, a public school in New York, so it
Mhm.
was housed within there. I met some amazing people, and it was an experience that obviously still talk about because I'm talking about it right now. But I teachers, especially for those age kids, you have to have the patience of a saint, which I don't. And it's such a hard job. So anyway, I did that, and I was just kind of lost. Did not know what to do. And then someone tipped me off to a thing called the NBC Page program, which is actually very well known, well respected program that NBC has in New York, and I think in Los Angeles too. But basically, what it is, I think there's something like 2,000 or 4,000 applicants for 80 positions. And
Wow.
then those 80 people, if you're accepted, which I ultimately was, you start off literally, I was giving tours of like the Saturday Night Live studio. And where, at that time it was still Tom Brokaw, where Tom Brokaw was doing the news and NBC Sports. And then after you graduate from giving tours, you can kind of request an assignment. So you can do something like within marketing, or you can do something within news. And I had that was it was the first year when I was there that they decided to start something new. So of the 80 people, they chose two. Somehow I was one of them. I do not know how. But one person was assigned to, his name was Bob Wright. At the time, he was chairman and CEO of NBC. Very powerful guy. And then the second person who was assigned to was me, to a guy named Tom Rogers. And Tom Rogers was the senior VP of all of NBC, but he was also launching MSNBC at that time with Bill Gates.
Wow.
So, um, by the way, this guy at the time was about 38 years old, which is crazy because he was just running, a massive corporation. So, long story short, um, Bill Gates would be in the office here and there, and then the office is on the top floor. It's insane. You have like catered lunches. You're living the good life up there. And this guy Tom Rogers was a really cool guy. And but I mean, his office, his neighbor in the office suite was a guy named David Zasloff. Well, David Zaslav is now the head of Discovery, Warner Brothers, all that. So he basically runs, and he's like the not the owner, but the corporate CEO and a large shareholder in all those companies. So these guys were like the real power players in media. Long story short, on one trip that Tom took to Seattle, MSNBC was starting to launch. I took the liberty of just sending my resume saying, "Hey, I work for Tom Rogers." Everyone knew who Tom Rogers was back then, and I was immediately hired. This was before my internship, my page program was over. So Tom Rogers was kind of half annoyed that I
Mhm.
applied, but like the business and aggressive side of him was so happy that I took the initiative, and
You
he
sent
wished me
it
well.
to the MSNBC
Yeah,
folks?
to
Oh,
MSNBC.
nice.
Yeah.
So
So
you
I
were
was
You were Rogers', like, assistant?
yeah, like intern basically.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate all the connections. I'm
right.
gonna jump on this new one.
So all I had to say was, I'm currently working for Tom Rogers," and they literally, like, called me back because 'cause they're terrified of, getting Tom Rogers mad at them. So, next thing you know, I was one of the first, like, literally probably one of the first 20 maybe producers, hired at MSNBC. I had no idea
Wow.
what I was doing. Everyone was coming from other local news stations, and it was, a wild time. So, that's kinda the genesis of it all.
So, but at this point, I mean, did you feel like, okay, I have an interest in journalism or in media? I mean, you sounded like you kind of took advantage of the opportunity because it was you didn't quite know what else you're doing. But do you have the bug at this point?
Short answer is yes, but I always I think it's weird. I don't know why I just struggled. There's people who just they know what they wanna do from a very
Right.
young age, and I
Right.
was not one of these guys. I just didn't know what I wanted to do, and again, I didn't think it could be a career, but then I started to kind of, like, reflect on things, and I realized, I was really active in high school. I worked we had a radio station, which was really unusual for a high school, but, we had a radio station. I had a show there. I was
Where was high school, by the way? I didn't get to that far back, but where did you grow up?
Highland Park, New Jersey, which is
Okay.
right in everyone in Jersey, does it by turnpike exit. So it's between it's between 9 and 10, but you can literally
Gotcha.
like throw a rock and hit Rutgers University. So we had a high school radio station, and we had a teacher named Bob Stevens, who I will never forget, and people who had him will never forget. I come from this weird place where there were a lot of exceptional, unusually smart, and went on to be unusually successful people. One of the claims to fame from my high school is Stanford from Sex and the City, who sadly passed away, but he was good friends with my sister. His name is Willie Garson. His real name is
Mhm.
Willie Pasmon. I was good friends with Jessica Pasmon. It was this kind of town with a
Yeah.
lot of really uber smart people. There's a guy named David Camp who went on, and he was an editor at GQ. He works for Vanity Fair now. He was, like off the charts intelligent people. So anyway, I reflected on all this, while I'm in the middle of all these like super smart people, and had no idea what I was doing. But I realized I was on the radio show. I was in the high school newspaper. That in college, I went to Brandeis University and I wrote for the paper. And so I was always like tied to journalism, but never
Yeah.
really into it. And then I kind of went to MSNBC wondering like, what am I doing? Everyone, like I said, had come from basically local news, so they knew the process. I didn't know anything. Back then, you used to have to run tapes. Like you literally, nothing was digital still, so you'd have to like run tapes. I mean, I sound like a grandfather right now, but it's just weird how much technology has it's weird. Number 1, you turn into your dad, which is weird, but number 2, like, the technology has advanced so much, but back when I first started, you literally had these big, like, videotapes that you'd have to, like, run back to a place called Playback where they would shove them into the machines, and that's how they would queue up the different videos. So it was a crazy learning experience. I didn't know about rundowns for news. I didn't know about how the control room worked, none of editing processes. So,
Wow.
Was thrown into all that. By the
What?
way, yeah, just real quick, MSNBC, because this is interesting. They, NBC is based in New York City, but MSNBC, they wanted it back then, it was to be this state of the art facility. So they purchased a warehouse in Secaucus, New Jersey, which is basically where they have outlet stores. That used to be called the Meadowlands, the stadiums out there. It's just kind of a swamp area right across from Manhattan.
Mhm.
This facility, I think, was 80,000 square feet. It was the biggest thing you've ever seen in your life. It just went
Wow.
on for the hallway. Like you could walk the hallways forever. And they were putting in like glass walls and the control room that you could see, and then in the control room, I mean, a studio in the middle of, um, you know, in middle of the newsroom, which you see a lot now, but back then it was totally novel. But it was the facility was crazy. And then after MSNBC, Major League Baseball moved in there. I think they're still there.
Wow.
Mm.
Wow. So you're okay, so you landed MSNBC, you're thrown into this role that you are perhaps questioning whether or not you're qualified for, but what kind of like what are your stories? What kind of what is the job actually?
Yeah. So I'm basically a word that rhymes with witch for everybody. I mean,
Okay.
I start as a I started as an associate producer and eventually worked up my way up to, a regular producer. There were so many different shows back then, and it's not what it was today. It wasn't like this left-leaning channel. It was supposed to be, you know, news, like
Right.
straightforward news, but they had primetime shows. They had a guy named John Hockenberry who was like this intellectual. He was in a wheelchair. Jane Pauley had a show at the time.
Mhm.
Man, it brings back memories. It was a show called Time and Again that was like a historic perspective with all the NBC archives. But I would basically work on the daytime news programming. Brian Williams, he had a show there at the time, but I would work on the daytime news programming, and the year we started was just crazy. There was the TWA crash.
Oh yeah.
There's so many big things happened like right away, and then I think it was the summer after it was Princess Di was
Oh
killed,
wow.
and a couple other crazy big events I just can't seem to remember right now. But all of a sudden it's this place is like humming, and I'm still just trying to figure out the system. But a lot of people are still there, and this is like almost 30 years later. It's back in New York City now at 30 Rock, but it was an incredible learning experience.
Wow. So there you stay there for how long and then what is the next chapter?
So, MSNBC, before we moved into this gargantuan facility, was actually housed inside of CNBC, which is in Fort Lee, New Jersey. So when we were there, so this was even before kind of this is what was still during like rehearsals, like MSNBC hadn't even started yet.
Oh wow.
And there was a show called, or it was a channel called America's Talking that was in there that we took over for. America's Talking was run by Roger Ailes, who went on to create Fox News,
Right.
literally created Fox News. So this is like how weird and like pioneering, I guess it was, is that no one knew who Roger Ailes was back then, but we basically took over his space, um, over at the CNBC building. So I got to know a guy named Bob Richbloom, who has since passed away, very sadly, a young guy too. But I don't know, he just took like a liking to me, thought I had good instincts. And so about 3 years after I'm at MSNBC, he reaches out and says, "I'm starting a new venture, and it's called WebFN." And I'm like, "What the hell is this?" He said, "It's streaming." Back then, no one knew what it was. I mean, YouTube didn't even exist. Nothing
This is
really existed
crazy.
yet. Yeah, this is before Facebook. This is before everything. So he says, "I'm going to start a streaming network." And these are some of the smartest kind of media minds in probably the world, if not the country. So it sounded like the world's dumbest idea to me. He basically wanted to he was an executive. He was a senior vice president CNBC, and he left CNBC. And there's so many crazy things back then. Like at CNBC at that time, Geraldo Rivera had a show. So I used to see Geraldo constantly, like, in the cafeteria and all the big CNBC names. And Geraldo drove this Bentley or Rolls Royce, and
Of
you'd see
course he
him
did. Of
and
course he did.
you see him cruising around he was such a nice guy, by the way. Nice guy, but a character. He also was the only guy, and this was in his contract. He had a shower built into his office, which I had
I
never seen.
love it.
He had a shower in there. So God bless him, man. He's still going strong at 80. But anyway, Bob Richboom says, I'm starting this venture called WebFN. Do you want in? He said, basically, I'm going to need help on the business side, like selling this thing. And he had already signed an agreement. There's a huge broadcasting company, not so big anymore, but back then it was really big, a family-owned company called Weigel. And so he created this deal with this company in Chicago. And I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but they were traditional media, right? They were traditional. They had a TV. They had a station in Chicago that was widely watched. So he had this idea to create a business show, and it was called First Business. And so we did a traditional business show, but we also started to stream it out. The problem is
Stream it
computers
on
back,
the internet?
yeah, which was
Okay.
crazy
So
because back,
it was the first idea of like, hey, people are gonna watch something live on their computer.
yeah, this is exactly the same time that Mark Cuban started his thing. And
Right.
Cuban, I think his was called like broadcasttv.com or broadcast.tv. That's how Cuban made tens of millions of dollars, was with a streaming site. So people were starting to say, "Hey, let me get into this." So Bob Richmond was in Chicago. The studio was in Chicago, but they wanted a presence in New York City. So he moved me into an office first at the American Stock Exchange, and then ultimately I moved to the New York Stock Exchange right before 9/11. And he had me doing like business stuff, but it's like what we're doing now, right? So um, Josh, you and I know it's like we have to be the content creators, but we also have to be the CEOs. We also, we have to handle the business side. We have
Right.
all these things. So basically, he brought me in to do sales, which I'd never done either. And then the next thing you know, he's like, I need you to report too. So now I'm like on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange and we're covering business news. And this is when Maria Bartiromo was there, and she was, the back then she was the money honey, and she made her name because she was like shoving floor traders out of the way to like break news and stuff. So this was just like, and looking back on it, while I was going through it, it is definitely not glamorous or that fun. It was like, what the hell's going on? What's happening? What's next? But looking back on it, it was pretty wild. So
So this
I
is
had.
you on camera now for the first time?
First time ever. They have me on
It
camera. Yeah, and they're using, like, versions of today's webcams, but, like, smaller ones.
right.
So it was, like, just so bizarre. So I had, like, a camera in, an office space, but then eventually we literally moved into the New York Stock Exchange. So I'm on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the classic pictures with the
Yeah,
traders with
right.
the vest on running around, and I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, just 0 idea what I'm doing. I don't know anything about business. I don't care about business news, but this is what's weird about this career is it drags you into places that you know, you jump on like a good idea. I thought, man, maybe Bob Richboom's up to something. Maybe we'll cash out like Mark Cuban, who knows? So
Right,
it was a
right.
really interesting idea. And even back then, like 25 years ago, people were already predicting the demise of traditional media. So people were already kind of like, hey, let me jump ship. So long story short, ended up doing that. I kind of taught myself about the stock market. And next thing you know, I was kind of like a pro and I was interviewing CEO. Like I remember I interviewed the CEO of Macy's. All these CEOs, every one of them was like tall, handsome guy, like in their 50s and 60s, with like the silver hair. And I'd be there for the ringing of the bell, and then I would interview them. So it was crazy, but that was my first foray into actual reporting.
Did you have an interest in getting into that as you started to work at MSNBC and get into that world? Did you ever think to yourself, I actually want to be behind camera now or in front of camera now and be the reporter?
Um, yes and no. I did. I think a lot of, they say there's a kind of a running joke in broadcast news that producers are just frustrated people who, weren't good enough to be on air. And there's a little bit of truth to that. But some people, that's just their thing. They're a behind the scenes person. But, I was always told, hey, go in front of the camera. You've got ability at this. I mean, I was beyond awful. I mean, horrible. Like, it would be hilarious to just watch it today. I don't even think any of the I'm sure
Yeah, find us
yeah,
some. Find us some.
Carm has some, I guarantee you. She stocks away stuff, so my mom definitely has some, but it was an unbelievable learning experience, and then the thing just, crashed and burned because it was way ahead of its time, and, uh, and then I had to pivot, and I needed a job, so I went back to MSNBC as a producer, and I started working for Dan Abrams, and Dan Abrams is the guy who
Oh yeah.
started Law& Crime. So, for him, I was producing stuff. Dan's, super bright guy. Very, very good at what he does. I learned a ton from him. But then I realized, look, I enjoyed the reporting. I also want to be in charge of my own future and destiny because when you're a producer on a show, shows come and go. And if the show gets canceled, they basically they try to keep people, but a lot of times the entire staff is just let go because they don't
Wow.
have a budget.
Yeah.
So I said, I realized then, like, if I'm a reporter or a correspondent, I can create my own destiny. And so um, I just started writing to news directors. I had a connection, and next thing you know, I ended up in local reporting in West Palm Beach, Florida.
And you're living still in New Jersey at the time?
Well, I had to move down. I
Well,
literally,
that's what I mean. That was my question. So that means pick everything up down to Florida.
yep, I literally. So number one, I was terrified again because now I'm going from live business reporting to news reporting, and even though I produced news, I was never like writing the stories. And there's like, there's writers and like every profession. I mean, there's lawyers and then there's lawyers who are, next level minds and stuff. So it's a skill and you've got to learn it. There's no way to learn it unless it's like baptism by fire. So I just remember I was terrified. Like I was so scared. My dad was, very encouraging. My mom was very encouraging. And this is like a kind of a wacky side story, but um, I knew a lot of people like within the industry who I met, and one of the people through other people, but one of the guys that I periodically just like get a drink with and hang out with, believe it or not, was Sean Hannity. and and
That
like
was not the name I thought you were gonna say.
we would all. I mean, it was like back then. It was like they weren't these huge names, so it was like and I'm kind of embarrassed by what Sean has become in a way because like he had different intentions, I think, in the beginning from but this is what I'm saying. People get dragged into weird spaces. But yeah, like Alan Combs, who was his sidekick, and him, like they would have like get-togethers at like New York City bars and stuff. And then anyway, the reason I bring it up is Sean Hannity. I was telling him I was, scared to report, and he said he had read this book called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And I went out, and I think this is right maybe when Amazon was starting, but I don't even think I got it at Amazon. But I picked up a copy of the book, and it was basically like, in spite of your fear, literally just do it anyway. And next thing you know, I just drove down to Florida, pretty much totally solo, and I end up in West Palm Beach before being hired pretty quickly thereafter in Miami. So, and
I
that's when
love
I
that.
really started my reporting. Yeah.
I love that. And now, so everybody understands. Now we're talking about you are like our local news reporter. Like when they're they're going to cover the World Series parade, something, something like that. They got their reporter on the street. You're the guy standing in the hurricane reporting on that. This is next level stuff for you at this point.
Yeah, or the cat stuck in the tree, that
Right,
too.
right.
Yeah, I mean, I knew I couldn't be in local news for very long, and kudos to those who stay in it. But number one, local news is kind of dying along with the rest of media. And after you've been doing it long enough, you basically covered every story in one form or another. Um, while I was going through it, this will probably come as no surprise. Like I was whining about it because I wanted to get to the network. That was my goal, and it was really hard to do. Really, really hard to do. But I was just kind of cutting my teeth, and then I got um, s- basically I knew someone who knew someone, and that the West Palm Beach thing was like a very short term, and I was told this. So very soon after, probably 6 or 7 or 8 months after, and that, by the way, in West Palm, I covered my first hurricane, Hurricane Wilma, which was scary as hell. But then I was basically invited to work at CBS in Miami, and I
Mm.
still didn't feel completely like prepared to be. Miami was like, it's a what they call a run and gun market. So everything happens super fast, breaking news. If it bleeds, it leads. So super long story short, and I know this is probably way more info than you ever wanted.
No, I love it.
I had a good friend that from West Palm Beach who is now a meteorologist in Tucson, Arizona. Didn't know anything. I'd never been to Arizona in my life, but I needed a place to like learn the craft of reporting. And so I said, I'm going to go to Tucson. And I had this amazing news director, guy named Forrest Carr, who also passed away. But he was like a real old school journalist. And that's where I learned how to like really tell a story, how to help edit a story. And honestly, it was the most fun because like local news is kind of being in like back in college. It's like young people, especially in a place like Tucson. Although Tucson happens to have a lot of veteran like reporters who've been there 30, 40 years because they love the weather. But
Mhm.
it was mainly a lot of young kids, and I was already older then. But we would just like we would work really hard, and then we'd go to like the local bars and clubs on Friday nights, and it was tons of fun. And that's where I met Ileana, my wife, the COE. Eventually, she was like a brand new cub reporter coming out of Yakima, Washington. But literally, like one of the stories I covered, and there's so many like ridiculous stories, but it was when I was kind of first there. There was a public library, and there was this hawk that was protecting its little hawk babies, and it was swooping down and attacking people going into the library. So I, so I remember like
You
that.
said, "Send Joel out there. We need
Yeah.
to we need to cover this."
So I remember we went out there, and the hawk tried to swoop down and like and take a swipe at us while we were covering, and I'm like screaming like a little girl running behind my photographer. But that's the kind of stuff that you do, and you look and during the time while you're doing it, you're like, this is the dumbest thing in the world, and afterwards, it's just like kind of a interesting memory. So yeah.
That's so funny. So you meet your wife there. She's involved in this whole world too. How long are you in Arizona? Because I love this so far. How much you're hopscotching across the country.
Yeah, well, anyone who's a news reporter, it is a transient world unless like I mean, there are people who are like from Kansas City and they go to college and they're like, the only place I want to work is Kansas City. And there are a lot of people like that. But I grew up literally New Jersey, New York, as a kid, like on a Sunday, like our parents would take us into Manhattan. It was Manhattan uh, you know, New York City is really one of the center pieces of the world, right? Literally Times Square is the crossroads of the world. So I just knew I wanted to like try to elevate and get higher. And so that was the goal. The goal was not local news, but you do have to bounce around. And luckily for me, the COE had just finished a job, like I said, in Yakima, Washington, and
Hmm.
she moved there, and she comes into the newsroom, and I was like, "Oh, she's cute." And she had a boyfriend, and I kind of had someone I was dating, and we ended up just being friends for like months, like 6 months, until I used to walk her dog, Josh. That's what I was. I
You
stooped
got to
to
do
be.
it. Sometimes you got to do the dirty work
Yeah.
first.
By the way, Zilla ended up being my dog, and loved me. No offense to the COE, mm, but we just yeah, we became friends, um, through work, and then the next stop was New York City. So,
And New York City because a job opened up.
um, so news is interesting because your success comes at the hands of usually major stories and tragedy, which I don't like, but that's when you get noticed. So when I was in Tucson, um, the first thing that happened was a border patrol agent named Brian Terry. He was shot and killed by illegal aliens, an illegal migrant coming across the border, and it was a huge story. And I think it was Janet Reno was the attorney general. And I'm just blanking. There was a name for the like they had a name for it, and I'm blanking on it, but it was all over the headline. So I was covering that, and then um, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who's from Tucson, there's an assassination attempt. She gets shot. Everyone thought she died. I mean, she was shot in the head. A few
Yeah.
other people died, and I was at the gym that day. It happened on a Saturday. It was a Saturday morning, and I was at the gym, just like on the treadmill working out. I'm sweating like a pig, and my phone just starts blowing up. The COE calls me, and they're like, "You got to get to UMC, which is the University Medical Center in Tucson." They're like, "This congresswoman was shot." So I literally just like hop off. They're like, "You don't have time to go back to get dressed. Just go." So I literally just
Wow.
go, and I'll never forget this. I would throw like crumpled clothing into the back that I needed to bring for dry cleaning. I look back in my car, I was like a slob. So I remember just pulling out like a pair of pants and like a wrinkled shirt, but my pants, because I was working out at the time, were like huge on me and they kept falling off. So I'll never forget this. I used one of the photographer's orange extension cords as my belt. I literally had an extension cord keeping my pants up. And I don't think I left that hospital for like a week. I mean, I'd go home at night, but I was just there, and we were getting updates on the congresswoman, and because of that, like I was on the ground, right? And I was able to like the hospital was the base, but the guy who shot her is, I believe his name was Jared Loeffner, just a crazy kid. So like my photographers, who were a lot of them were from Tucson, they knew the area so well. And the network producers, what they do is they just fly, they like swoop down and just try to like steal stuff. Basically, that's how the network producers work.
Right.
Sorry to the network producers, but we would literally just scurry around during the day, and like one day I got Jared Loeffner's dad to say something. And this was a huge story back then. And the news cycle lasted more than 5 minutes. So like this story went on for days, if not weeks. And I was breaking a lot of big stuff. And I would be on like my stories would be on Fox News Channel or MSNBC or whatever. Like they would take my clips from my stories. And that's basically how I ended up in New York. ABC News had me fly in for an interview. They basically gave me the job, and then in classic TV, this was network ABC, like where David Muir is. I couldn't believe it was happening. And then the woman who was in charge of recruiting, she was literally fired, like from the time she gave me a verbal agreement to when I was actually hired. So it fell through. But I was in New York, and Fox local somehow knew I was there and interviewed me, and I got a job with Fox Local, which is like the flagship station. So that's how I wound up They wanted an investigative reporter, which is now a new thing because I'd never been an investigative reporter, and that's a whole new world because news is like day to day. Like you go, you shoot your story, you finish your story, you go home. And
Right.
investigative reporting, you can be on a story for like 5 months, and I did not like that because it was like, um, I think I'm more of an adrenaline junkie, even though like I'd never fly out of a plane. I hate roller coaster, but I'm saying like news wise, like I needed the action. So then
Right.
I was in this whole new world of like, okay, I'm an investigative reporter, and it's cool. I'm in New York, but I don't really love what I'm doing. So it's now that I'm talking about all this, it is interesting because you kind of go where the jobs are, but it's not always exactly what you want.
Yeah. But it's funny how it does seem to kind of, even though it's meandering, it's leading you down this path of, you know, each thing is kind of building on the last, and you're picking up experience and adding to the resume along the way. So
Yep.
you're what year are we at right now that you're in New York and at Fox?
So I get to New York, I think 2000 and maybe 2000, like 2010, closing in on 2011.
Okay.
So then I'm at Fox, and there's this crazy story as an investigative reporter. By the way, I worked with a guy named Arnold Diaz, who is like in New York City, like a legendary figure. You know, each city has like their people that they know. Like LA had this guy, Sam Rubin, the entertainment reporter. Well,
Oh yeah.
Um, Arnold Diaz was, I'm blanking on the other guy's name right now. It'll come to me. Anyway, Arnold Diaz was just a legendary, like, investigative reporter. He had won 63 Emmy Awards.
Wow.
63. I mean, it's like it took up his entire house. So he was like my work partner. Like, he did his stories and I did my stories, but everyone in New York knew Arnold, and he was super nice to me and kinda, like, helped me. But I had this, like, maniacal producer. But we got tipped off to a story that was interesting. New York's got these major airports, but one that's not talked about as much is Westchester Airport in Westchester County. This is a really like affluent, nice area. But this was when Barack Obama was president, when he would fly in and out of there, and there was like 9 other, commercial flights, airlines, Delta, this, that would fly down to like Boca or whatever. So it wasn't like the biggest airport, but it was a important airport. And we got tipped off that the air traffic controllers, were sleeping on the job, like they were literally out
Oh
cold.
geez.
And they had computers. You're not allowed to have laptops in there, and they had cell phones. And so it was a guy on the inside who was basically blowing the whistle. And that was like our first story. And he got us video, and it became a really big story within New York that these guys were, because, you got the president going in and out. But by far, the best story that I did there, we did kind of an expose on New York City street food vendors, and, on video, we were following these guys, got the best shot of a food vendor blowing his nose into his bare
Oh
hands,
God. Don't
and
tell me.
the big, big glob of snot, and then picking up the bun and putting the hot dog in,
Ah.
and I'll never forget we we followed this, like, we had a hidden camera, we were, like, hidden in the streets of New York, but I'll never forget, it was this poor family from, like, the Midwest, and they were, like, the recipients of this particular hot dog, and I had to go up to them afterwards and be like, "I don't know if you realize this, but this is," and we showed them the video, and
Ah.
they all started to, like, gag and but it
Oh my
was like,
God.
it was such a dumb story, but it was like that's the kind of story that got so much attention, like, people were
Oh,
talking about it.
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, it was, like, written up in the New York Post, like, it was crazy. So I've done a lot of interesting fun and a ton of stupid, crazy, moronic stuff, but, yeah, so that was New
But
York
then
City.
eventually things take a complete shift for you. What brings that all about?
Well, there's one more, like, So there's one there's one more like excuse me, one more like news iteration, which is so now I'm at Fox 5 in New York, which is the flagship station, and there's Fox News Channel, and there's a lot of like incestuous relationships between Fox and Fox 5, and everyone knows everybody. Long story short, I wanted to get to the national level. I never really particularly wanted to go to Fox. I didn't have like I didn't really know. It wasn't quite as polarized then, but I was interested in getting to the network, like NBC net, like the network, or ABC or CNN. But they needed help at Fox News Channel, and so they sent me to DC. And I'll never forget this. So now I'm moving again, but this time with the wife, and we've got our first baby. And we I went ahead of them, and I was staying in a hotel for a couple weeks while we were looking for a house. And I just got there on like a cold, rainy, crazy night. And now I'm like thrown into politics. And one thing
Right.
I just didn't want to do ever was politics. I just didn't want wasn't an interest of mine. It wasn't something I wanted to do. Now I'm in like the belly of the beast. Like we used to do our live shots on the Capitol, but I got there. It's like a rainy, dark night. My first night, and I was like, "This is definitely like an omen of what's to come." But I it's weird because you got to be careful what you wish for. Like my dream again was to get to national news, and there I did cover like huge stories for 3 or 4 years where I was traveling all across the country. They sent me to London at one point. You name it back then, and I was there. Like the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting, I was there.
Wow.
There was a terror attack in San Bernardino, I was there.
Oh, yeah.
There was a
Big story.
church shooting in South Carolina, I was there. Like um, I one of the perks too of Fox is, I would go to the, Super Bowl and the World Series each year, which was awesome. So I'm sitting
Nice.
in
That's
like
not a
yeah.
bad perk.
No, like the Cleveland, Indians, Chicago Cubs World Series, I'm in the dugout taking pictures. It was pretty awesome. And then, the Houston, I was at the Houston, New England Super Bowl. It was pretty fascinating, but I didn't really love politics. And then we get into this is like a historical tale. We get into the Me Too movement, and suddenly Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes are making headlines for the wrong reasons, and now it's like complete turmoil within Fox News Channel. And I have my own personal story, and it just let's put it this way: it was no longer the right fit for
Right.
me. For me,
Uh-huh.
so I just, on my own in 2018, decided it was time to move away from Fox. I thought for sure I'd get hired by CNN, I'd get hired by this, but once you're out, once the door closes, it's really hard to get in. And it was at a time where, like I said, the Me Too movement was like raging. Being a white guy, in his 40s back then, like, was not what they were looking for. So it became next to impossible, and I went through a real, real
Incredibly
hard
competitive,
and unbelievably
career path,
competitive.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, unbelievably competitive. I just couldn't get back in, and I was
Wow.
terrified because now I've got a wife, I've got 2 kids, and the door just shut. So the COE is from LA, and at that point, we literally were like, "Okay, I'll get a job in local in LA." We moved to LA, and I couldn't even get into local. It was crazy. It
Wow.
was just so hard. Ileana, meanwhile, who is, no, her maiden name is Diaz. She was getting hired without even sending resumes out, which would
Huh.
drive which would drive me crazy. But they were looking for like younger Latinos, whatever. So she was like getting hired left and right in New York. She worked for CBS, and I just went through a really dark time. Let's put it that way. And I eventually started a company where we were doing media related stuff. We're doing a lot of video for companies, and it was actually doing really well. I didn't like it because I missed the adrenaline of reporting, but I was, starting to make really good money. And then boom, the pandemic hits, and once again, the world screeched to a halt, and, that's how we get to the podcast.
So pandemic hits and that shuts down the work that you had been doing, this new project you had undertaken?
Yeah, so I started a company, it was called it still exists, called Content Partners Media. I still have the email, and, basically what we were doing was consulting some companies on, like, well, what's the best way to get media attention, but more the bigger kinda, part of the business was, and I kind of fell into this through a friend, but we were working with biotech companies, and they were asking us, "Hey, we have a new drug for fibromyalgia. We need to create a 1 minute video for our stockholders." So it was very good money because you're now charging biotech companies, but it was nothing I had
Right.
an interest. Like I just had no. I'm a news junkie. Like when I go
Right.
home tonight, I watch. Like I am constantly like I'm a news addict. And that's really where my interests lie. It's kind of crazy because it took me basically up to now to figure all of this out. So, um, but I was doing that, but we were doing these interviews for the corporate stuff. Everything was in person. There was no. Now we're already
Right.
used to a world of Zoom, right? But back then, in 2020, or prior to 2020, everything was done in person.
It it is amazing how much we have adapted to that. It really was kind of unthinkable to have people, even like what you're talking about on the news, and everybody was in studio. If they were interviewing someone, the anchor would turn to their left and there's that person they're interviewing. Maybe you would see somebody that was like in a off location studio, but this what we're all used to now is seeing people in their library, their den or whatever being interviewed on the nightly news is just so used to it now, but it's hard to remember that that was just never happened back then.
It was so unheard of. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, the person who loved it the most was the COE. So the COE, who, as you all know, I love dearly, she doesn't have the same passion for news as I do. Like, I love being out there, but she was like, "Wow, now I can report from home and just Zoom." Like, so
Right,
she was like covering news from
right.
home. But even I mean, Josh, even in the legal world, like now you're having arraignments via Zoom, right? Or you're
Oh,
having
yeah.
case hearings via Zoom. So the whole world has, shifted since then, and ironically, I think it actually got people more invested in what we're doing because 'cause we're streaming, right? So people are
Right,
kinda used to now being on their home, so it's kinda like a full circle moment, and, pandemic hits, everything just goes to hell, and my dad was getting older and not well, and my mom was here. My parents had been living, on and off in Miami for 20 years, so I convinced the COE with our 3 kids to move here in 2020, just as the pandemic was breaking out. And I will never forget this. My entire family, 5 people and 2 dogs, traveled from LA to Miami for $125, I think it was. I think it was 25 bucks a ticket because the airlines were no one was flying. Literally
wow.
no one was flying. We were like one of like maybe 2 other people on the plane. Like, we had an entire jet to ourselves. We fly to Miami, and, the rest, as they say, is kinda history. I didn't know what the hell to do. Everyone was on lockdown. My mom was losing her mind, and I just said, "Let's start a podcast," and,
What so I mean, but that is, you say it like it's kind of the natural choice, but that is a funny thing to jump into, to just like, "Hey, we're doing nothing else. I'm kind of," and I'm inserting perhaps your thought process, maybe it was different, but I got time on my hands. I kinda know this media world. Mom, you're not busy. Let's do this. Was that the thought, or what happened?
yeah, I mean, the thought was, um, I remember when we are like, in the midst of the pandemic, there was some viral video going around, and it was actually of a rabbi in, like, Jerusalem who spoke perfect English, and the video went viral because he was like, "This is, you know, even though it's a horrific circumstance and a lot of people are dying," he's like, "It's a reset it's like a reset button for the world." Um, and it kind of
Yeah.
resonated with me. So I said to myself, what I really like to do is I like, you know, interviewing people. I mean, that's all. I've always been interested in people, and really enjoyed, the reporting aspect. And now podcasting was getting huge. It was becoming a thing, and I had a lot of contacts in the media world, but I thought, um, who better to ask? I thought it would be kind of, well, when we started off, it was not true crime. It was kind of like a tongue in cheek. I basically thought like, okay, I'll overtake Joe Rogan by having my mom on. I was kind of influenced early on too by by Howard Stern, and Howard Stern's mom used to call in all the time. And my mom was just one of these characters my whole life that everyone, like, my friends would come over, they'd say, "Hey, is your mom home?" Like, my mom was always, like, the fun mom, like, the cool person, a pain in the ass with me, but everyone loved her, super opinionated, a licensed therapist, Holocaust survivor, she'd been through everything, so I was like, "She'd be a good guest," and then we just started. It was once a week. We rented a studio space for an hour, and we had no idea what we're doing, no idea how to do anything, and we interviewed like Carol Baskin from Tiger King. We interviewed this guy Avi Loeb, who's a Harvard astrophysicist, and he thinks he's seen alien spacecrafts. He's written books about it. We interviewed this guy Ben Ferenz, who was the last living prosecutor from the Nuremberg trials, who was literally
Wow.
102 years old when we interviewed him. And he passed away at 103. So we had, like, fascinating interviews, but got absolutely no we get like 200 views, and I just didn't know the world. And then,
That was my I don't wanna interrupt you because 'cause
no,
I'm loving this story, but that was one of the things I was hoping you'd explain for us because surviving the survivor, I can get kind of where that title is coming from, but how it's ended up what you're covering now seems to be very different. So back then, it wasn't intended to be all of this. It
e-
was you and your mom just kind of interviewing people.
yeah, basically my entire life has been an accident. Um,
Right.
I was probably an accident. I'll ask Carm about that, but my entire life has sort of been an accident. Um, Yeah, it was our first tagline, and I came up with this. I'm actually proud of this one. It was schmooze, news, and neurotic views. So it was like our take on the world. It was just like, like, it was just insane, but we were getting absolutely no numbers. And I then make
Is it
a
on YouTube at this time too?
no, this we were just doing audio.
Gotcha.
Some of these I think do exist on YouTube. We were just doing audio at this time, but then people said to me, "Hey, you got to be doing video because video is going to be the future." And da 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 da. So then we did get on YouTube, but I reconnected during this time, and then I promise I'll shut up. I don't think I've talked this much in an hour in my life, but um, so I reconnect with Steve Cohen, otherwise known as Meave Moen, on our show, who you've had the distinct pleasure of meeting, who's a great guy.
Fantastic gentleman. Yes.
Yeah, a very, interesting character, let's put it that way, Steve. But he knows everybody, and he's like this sensational booking producer from network news, and Steve was going through a tough time in his own life, and there was a story that was kinda resonating with him right out of South Florida where we were, and it was this Dan Markel case. That's kind of our original case, and Dan Markel, for those who don't know, I'll tell you in 3 seconds, he grew up in Toronto, went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School. He's this dynamic legal mind. He's being offered gobs of money to work at private firms, says no. He wants to be a law professor. He gets hired at FSU. He marries Wendy Adelson. The marriage starts to go south. Wendy Adelson's mother gets really involved in a custody battle. They're divorced a year later, after things were really kind of degrading. He pulls into his driveway and he's shot and killed. Shot twice in the head. He dies like 9 hours later. So he actually dies the next day. Uh, this happened in 2014. It was 2 or 3 years of extensive police work. They tie it back to a Latin King gang member from 30 blocks from where I'm sitting right now, and another guy who's a bad guy Turns out that they were hired to kill Dan Markel in a murder for hire plot. They connect it back to the Adelsons. Charlie Adelson's convicted a year ago. Donna was just supposed to go on trial. The ex-wife may eventually get caught up on this, but we started doing this story and get 2,000 views, 5,000 views, 10,000 views, and then it
Wow.
was just, and then it just started to take off. And unlike the stock market where I worked, unlike politics, which I really couldn't stand, um, I had always been into true crime. My dad is, who was a psychiatrist. My mom was a social worker. I'd always been riveted by like the Datelines, the 48 Hours, all those shows, all the documentaries. I was just fascinated about why people do these things. So loved it. Um, Started to cover other stories, and we went from 1 day a week to live every day. And then again, another complete accident was, I mean, the majority of people in true crime, and they're still doing this. It's one person on camera kind of going in depth on a story, where I was like, I want to bring my news and interview skills and basically be like the Larry King of true crime, where I'm not the expert. I don't dive deep into these. I mean, I do by default, but as you know, Josh, we've got the hashtag best guests in true crime, and every night we bring on a panel of 3 people. It's a live nightly show, and I'm loving it. I mean, I'm loving it, but
And
it's still, yeah, it's still a maze. It's still like a mystery. You know this as well as I do, but you see people who are, getting 10 times the views on their videos sometimes, and you're like, what am I doing wrong? So there's
right.
still like this whole path that, you're still trying to go down and figure out. But this has by far been, I think, the most fun I've had. And also, and then I'll shut up. The entire time I was in news, local reporting, producing, I probably got 10 to 15 emails, and 90% of them were, "I hate your tie." That was it. And now I probably get 30, 40 tweets a day, 10 to 20 emails a day, Instagram, and people are so engaged in the community.
Yeah.
When my dad was passing away, people were sending gifts, it's unreal, the community that we built. So, it's been an amazing ride.
It really is an amazing community that you've built. And I think part of that is because you are doing something so different. Did how you called it Larry King of true crime? I hadn't thought about it, but that's a perfect way of explaining it. I do love. I mean, no one is doing that. There's a lot of talking head type folks, and some of them fantastic. Maybe they'll bring on a guest and talk about something, but this kind of panel discussion, rehashing, bringing in experts, and you manage to get phenomenal people on your show. I've been very honored to be on there a few times.
Yeah.
It really
You're
is. Nobody else is doing it, and so I applaud you for that. And what I'm curious too, because you kind of explained it, but you also kind of glazed over it. Was at what point did you go, "Oh, I get it. We're pivoting, everybody.
Mhm.
Hey, all hands on deck. We're no longer me and mom chatting with folks. We are true crime people now. We're all in on this. We're following this trial. We're going to start this panel discussion." How did that come about?
Again, this goes back to like the Gabby Giffords thing. So sometimes like a horrible circumstance propels you forward in sort of the news business. By the way, the whole me interviewing people was just kind of a total accident. I think again, I just somehow we went from interviewing one person to then we would have a panel of two, and then it stuck. And it was, they say that success in this world comes from, niches like, true crime, but then like a hyper niche within that. And we really are, as far as I know, the only like kind of panel nightly show. But to answer your question, how do we go like true crime all the time? So we were doing the Markel story, and then um, those 4 University of Idaho students were
Yeah.
um, killed in like the most vicious fashion. Brian Koberger gets arrested. We're on that, and now our numbers just start to like soar. We were getting videos with 100,000 views, and then that just
Wow.
changed. That changed everything, and it's kind of counterintuitive. Like I remember Carm saying, "No one wants to see you 5 days a week. Just stick to one day." But people really want the content. And I was
Yeah.
like, "I'm going to do this as a nightly show." And that's where it became like a real full-time um full-time deal. And it's, we just covered we covered Charlie Adelson last year, but I was just at the Sarah Boone trial, which was kind of our first, not, nothing that we were connected to previously. I just went up there and covered it, and that was so fun for me. It was just obviously a horrible story, but got me back into my news roots. I'm back in the courtroom and I'm hustling and I'm trying to get interviews and I'm getting information and I'm putting it out there. So we're going to be doing a lot more. Like I'm going to go to the Matty Soto trial with Stefan Stearns. That's a definite, and probably go to Koberger, but I'm definitely going to start covering some of these trials moving forward.
Wow. Wow. Um, with the few minutes that we have left, tell us what is, if this even exists, what is a typical day? I mean, is this a I got to imagine with the amount of stuff that you're putting out. I know how hard I'm working. I can only imagine how hard you're working. Is this like a wake up in the morning full-time endeavor? What's going on?
Great question. I think I'm a masochist because I never feel like I'm working enough, which I don't want to, have anyone psychoanalyze me. But this goes back to, my sister being this amazing student, a doctor. My dad was, as long as I can remember, he was up at 5 in the morning exercising before that was fashionable. Then he would go to work. My dad had the craziest work ethic because he was a child of the Great Depression. So,
Yeah.
no matter what I do, I never feel like I'm doing enough, except for when I covered Sarah Boone. So for the Sarah Boone trial, I'd wake up, I'd go to court, I would be live chatting or tweeting the entire morning session, and then race out of the courtroom. We do a lunch live, um, race back into the courtroom. We do the PM, and then I race back to our hotel and we do an evening wrap up show. And people really wanted it, and that's the format for that we're going to use moving forward for trials. The day to day with this, it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit, like depending on a news cycle. Right now, it's a little more quiet, so um, I should love it because it gives me the flexibility to go to the gym, to go to my kids' T-ball game. But I am the kind of guy that just has to be really busy. But with that said, it never stops. Like there's so many small things like um, I'm building a thumbnail and then I have to switch the guests. So now I've got to switch the face of the thumbnail. I've got to
Right.
tweet the show out. I got to build the social media side. I've got to put little short videos out for YouTube. So it's not like a 9 to 5, but I wish you guys could see a 360. My studio is basically a glorified giant walk-in closet slash studio above a Bank of America, which is just literally 3 blocks from my home. And so I've just built this really like cozy space in here. I come in here, I leave the studio lighting on, and I'll do work, and but it's not traditional in the sense of clocking in and clocking out. Do you find it that way, Josh?
Not at all. Not at all. And I'm not used to that. I mean, I'm used to kind of the job of like every day is something new and kind of responding to things, but this really is, you know, it's very difficult to plan out your day. We try to make content that we're like, okay, we want to make sure that we release this, on this day every single week. But then in between, things are constantly changing. And just when you think you're going to have a breather, some celebrity gets
Mhm.
arrested or something, and you do get caught up in that, what you've described as an adrenaline rush of staying on top of these things and making sure that you're, people who have taken the time to subscribe to your channel and give you some attention, that you're giving them as much value as you possibly can.
Yeah, it's and
Not
I'm
to
I'm
mention that, no, go ahead. I was gonna say, but not to mention too, that even when you do your show, your nightly show, we're not even talking about kind of a traditional, here's the rundown, you're gonna do this 15-minute segment, here's the A block, talk about this. then we're gonna do the B block. Like, it's a interactive responding to questions, subscribers making comments, trying to get to include all your guests. It's a it's a moving feast
Mm.
as you're doing it.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because again, like, everything is a learning experience, but just literally sitting through this, I mean, from jury selection to the verdict, the reading of the verdict, at Sarah Boone, like, my respect for the law profession was just through the roof. I mean, it's literally, you know, 4D chess in real time, but being a good interview is sort of similar because someone will say something totally unexpected, and then you've got to you have to kind of roll with it. So there are similarities. So I mean, you got amazing training in this as well. I'm always trying to come up with new ideas to keep things fresh. We're going to be announcing something fairly soon that I think people will love. But while I'm talking to you right now, I just had this idea because one of the things that what I want to do is cover more breaking news. This whole YSL thug story, whatever it is, out of Atlanta. I honestly haven't paid any attention, but like yesterday, it's the longest criminal trial in Atlanta history, and suddenly the guy took a plea deal. So
Yeah.
when things like this happen, I want to be able to react because my training, my sort of bread and butter is breaking news. Like I would just get to places and start breaking news. But the thing with this is you also need like a legal take. So I'm now running through my head. I'm gonna mention this to Josh. Maybe when there's big breaking news, Josh, we hop on, we simulcast on both our channels,
Love it.
and
Love it.
we hash it out from a news perspective and a legal perspective. So, um,
You call me. If
yeah,
I'm if I'm not in court with my day job, you call me and I'll hop on board and we'll do it. I love
yeah.
it.
By the way,
Um,
let me ask you, is your hope to one day pivot to this being full time?
I think so. I think so, absolutely. As much as I possibly can and still keep the lights on in our house and our 3 kids fed.
Hmm.
I think so. It's it you know how it is. It's you love it. It's an incredible community of people that you're dealing with. I'm telling you, I went to CrimeCon for the first time last year, the one that was in Memphis, and or I guess that was this year, pardon me.
Nashville.
Yeah, Nashville, pardon me. And I was just blown away. I was absolutely blown away by how wild it was, the community of people involved in this true crime world, and they're nice and enthusiastic and caring, and that really got a bug in me. And then, I just it's there's a lot of stress and difficulty being a lawyer when you're sitting next to someone who has real life consequences of what's going to happen in court. It's very different when you're standing on the outside just kind of talking about those
Mm,
ramifications. You don't have to carry those burdens with you every night. And so I thoroughly enjoy it. Thank you for asking me that
yeah.
question. I hope that I do manage to make this into something that becomes much more of my full-time endeavor every day.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Um, I
you're a total natural at it, and obviously you
oh,
got the background as a lawyer, so yeah, I mean, you're gonna continue to blow up,
oh,
and I
you're
think this
you
is
you're
yeah. No, I was gonna
you're
say this is
very
only
kind.
getting big. This is only getting like the medium is only getting bigger. So
I think so. It really is. Many more people are turning towards things like YouTube and Twitter for their news, and it just doesn't seem like there's any quit in all of this. So we are along for the ride.
yeah,
Last question I got for you, and then I want you to tell us, pardon me, about your book, obviously, and where people can find you. But is there anything you can share with us about what's next? Do you have a plan people should stay tuned for, or is you let me know?
yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of a little. No, I mean it's not top secret, but we're still working on it, and it's gonna be totally like a work in progress. But basically, we have a second channel which is now called Best Trials. But it was, by the way, one of the things with YouTube are these mods who are unbelievable. They basically, work. They volunteer and they mod the chats, and they're invaluable. So I had this idea, whenever we created the second channel, Best Trials, that we were going to, basically cover trials. But trials are really tough because they're just so long.
Hmm.
And it's all day, and it's just too much. I was feeling like you're saying the burden of your client, but I was feeling the burden of torturing like mods who offered to do it and wanted to do it, but it wasn't really feasible. So super long story short, starting a little bit later this month, what we're hoping to do is launch uh, something called Best Talk in True Crime, and it's going to be like talk radio, but on YouTube. And we have and will invite many of our best guests who are interested in kind of hosting their own show on the second channel. Everyone's got like a different niche, everyone's got a different passion. And it's going to be like a collective, like of all of the best guests in true crime coming together in one channel. The COE is really working on that. We've got 2 or 3 people that we're going to start with. I've invited Josh, by the way, for the record, but it's hard to juggle everything. This is like a really big endeavor because the COE is going to be kind of quote unquote executive producing it. Not everyone's been, it's one thing to be a host as opposed to a guest. So not everyone has been a host, but we're going to start really slow. But we basically want it to be a place for all of you to be able to come to, where a lot of the people you're used to seeing um, as guests on our show or other shows will now have their own content on this channel. So that's what we're
I love
hoping
it.
for. But everything
I
kind of
love it. I
evolves.
think it's a brilliant idea, and I also think it's another thing that's just not happening, and obviously a space that people would welcome. So always ahead of the curve. I appreciate that. That sounds
Always by
very cool.
accident.
Always by accident, but it sounds fantastic. All right. Tell us where they can find the book. Tell us where they can find you. Thank you so much for your time here today.
That was awesome. Love hanging with Josh. The podcast, the primary um, place to sort of watch it is YouTube. It is more of a show per se than a podcast because, we also bring up elements like graphic elements and things. But YouTube, it's at Surviving the Survivor. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, the audio, it works from an audio perspective as well. So, Spotify, Apple Podcasts are the big ones. Um, and we've got our own website, which we have to keep up, survivingthesurvivor.com. And then, as you know, Josh, I wrote a book. It's kind of I'm the butt of many jokes because I like to plug it. Not because I want to make oodles of money, but because I say that it is the most important story I've ever reported on. It's my mom's child Holocaust survival story. It's like 20% that or 15% that, and the rest is her life advice to me, having gone through the Holocaust, being a licensed therapist. She lost a child. I had a brother. She lost my father, her husband of 63 years during the writing of this book. And she's like the most optimistic, positive. I'm constantly whining. She's the exact opposite. Very positive. She's a force in nature. And so I just want to be able to share that story with everybody. And that is available anywhere books are sold, on Amazon. You can go to a local bookseller and if they don't have it, they'll order it. But, and it's also being sold, around the world in the UK, Australia, you can get it on Amazon. So I appreciate you letting me plug that.
No, absolutely. I say this, it's phenomenal. It it is amazing when you find a book that it's got definitely heavy moments in it. It's got definitely moments that are if you've experienced any kind of tragedy in your life, are going to bring you to the point close to tears. And then you'll turn the page and you're laughing your ass off because your mom is just a funny person on top of all of the other wonderful parts of her character. She's a very, very funny lady, and there's some very funny moments and captured text exchanges that are hilarious in the book. So do yourselves a favor and check it out. Joel, again, one of the hardest working guys on YouTube. This was fascinating. I loved hearing your entire story. Thank you so much for coming on here. I appreciate it. Take care, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. See you soon, Josh.
Absolutely. All right, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Again, our plan is to have more of these guests on. If there are other folks that you would like to hear from, please let us know in the comments. We appreciate all of you. And thank you again for joining us for another episode in our Courtroom Confidential Conversations series.